did our characters, and I had Shin, and Shin is the main character, and he is one of like the most complex characters. He goes through a lot in the camp and out of the camp, and he was born into this camp in North Korea, so he doesn't really know much outside of camp when he gets out, so you can imagine what he has to go through when he does get out, because he has no idea what the outside life is. He has a mother, father, and brother, but he doesn't get really along with his parents. He did with his mother at first, but she would take his food, and then he would have no food to eat, so then like that hatred just kind of went on and on throughout as she would keep doing these things to him. And then when Johnny talked about yesterday how his brother and mom tried to escape from camp, and he turned his own family in, and he hates his father because he believes that he is the reason that he got into this camp in the first place. And then he eventually escapes camp with his friend Park, which we showed in the video yesterday.
I had Park. He was an outsider. He wasn't born in the prison like most of the prisoners were. So they put Shin on duty to watch him and make sure that they could gain as much information from him, see what he was telling the other prisoners. And he was kind of shy and reserved at first, but he broke down his walls and started talking to Shin as much as possible. Told him about food and the outside world, about Kim Jong-un, things that Shin didn't know about originally. And then Park kind of planted the idea in Shin's head to escape from camp and run away. That's basically
I had his uncle. It wasn't his actual uncle. He just preferred to be called uncle. And he took care of Shin after he was tortured in the underground rooms places for snitching. And then he helped him. They thought that Shin thinks that he had other previous training in medical things to take care of him. So because he didn't have much of a physical thing, so.
Yeah. To clarify, he was the one when his mother and brother got like killed, executed. The guards took him to an underground prison inside the camp, and this is where he met Uncle.
Right, now Shin's family. You see, unlike most families in the outside world, Shin has basically no general love or sympathy towards his own family. He basically views them as competition or either competition or help to get food at the very best. He basically views his mother and father as responsible for him being in the camp, and his brother. As for his brother, he never really knew him very well, as they only saw each other a couple times a year. So when he was executed, Shin really didn't feel much about it. Same with his mother, although Shin probably felt a bit more anger when she was executed as well. At the point in the novel where Shin's brother and his mother try to escape, Shin's the one who finds out and snitches on them, only to then be punished himself. Because, in Camp 14, you're basically punished for something that your relatives do as well, even there.
So on to our vocab. I had defectors, and it's a person who has abandoned their country or cause in favor of an opposing one. So this was used a lot throughout the book because many people in North Korea would run away to South Korea because of the harsh living conditions that there were. And then it's used in the book several times, as I said, and it shows that Shin is a defector and that there are thousands of defectors in South Korea. And then a lot of them stay in South Korea, but some of them moved into China and even to the United States. And then a quote was, by 2012, there were about 24,000 defectors in South Korea.
I chose comply, which is act in accordance to what you demand, and I chose this word because it's used a lot between the prisoners and the guards, because they knew that they had to obey everything that they said, otherwise there would be consequences for them, and the consequences were never good.
mine. Yeah, decadence, this one's mine. I picked it because I had to pick a vocab word, so that's why it's on here. It means moral or cultural decline as characterized by excessive indulgence in pleasure or luxury. And its use in the book was, some newcomers are disgusted by what they see as the decadence and inequality of life in the South.
Okay, So I had martyring,
Marauding.
marauding, sorry.
Marauding.
Marauding.
There you go.
That's my word I chose. Definition is going about in search of things to steal or people to attack. So kind of like when Shin would go out and search to steal her food because he didn't have any food. And the use in the book, but martyring for food was hardly an exceptional activity in North Korea.
Meaning it was,
Bad, like you shouldn't. do it.
no, meaning it was common.
Oh.
Meaning everybody did it.
Arduous. This means revolving or requiring strenuous effort or difficult or tiring. As in the book, its use was, he was also assigned less arduous work and made certain that Shin had a warm place to sleep. This occurs relatively early on when one of the school teachers gives Shin, who actually has a little bit of sympathy towards Shin, gives him less tough work after seeing all the stuff he's been through.
Okay, these are our main ideas.
This one was mine. In Camp 14, everyone is a competition for food. So it gives an example early on in the story that Shin would eat his mother's food when she went out to work, and she would come back and beat him because she didn't have any food for the rest of the day. That was one of the bigger points within the story. Another example is the classmates ratting each other out if they don't meet their work quotas at school or if they do something against the rules. So they would get extra food for the week or the day, and everyone was competition. So that's basically all that is.
How do conditions affect how people bond? In Camp 14, one common theme is how Shin basically makes friends or bonds with other people. You see, under the government of North Korea, his views are very differently, especially in somewhere in those camps. He sees the guards as like the top authorities, almost more like his parents than his actual parents, despite how quickly they'll also beat him, just like his own mother. However, he basically sees his family as competition for food, spite, or just not interest at all. This is also common amongst basically all children and residents, especially the younger ones who grew up under the camp, to basically look up to the guards and North Korea's government as basically highly, almost divine-like figures, or even just, at the very least, parental roles. So basically, the traditional families and friendships have been replaced by loyalty to the states. And it isn't until Shin actually meets up Uncle in Park and he learns about outside concepts of love and loyalty, and that he learns to bond with other people for his own personal interests and reasons.
Okay, this one was mine, and I wanted to do like people that lived in North Korea versus South Korea and the living conditions, like how different they were. So the Escape from Camp 14 takes the reader through Shin's escape journey in North and South Korea. And throughout the book, it shows how much harder life was for Shin in North Korea versus South Korea. So I looked up some statistics about the differences, and 1.19 million people actively are serving in the military in North Korea, due to 655,000 people serving in the military in South Korea. So it just shows how much military means to North Korea versus South.
Now, are those volunteer military or are they conscripted? Are they required to be in military?
It didn't say on the website, it just said serving in the military. So, and then less than 0.1% of North Koreans have access to internet, while in South Korea, 81.5% of South Koreans have access to internet. And then the GDP per capita is 1,800 for North Korea, and South Korea it's 32,400. So that's how much the annual income is for a certain time for per person.
What was your understanding of it from the book itself?
In the book, I just wanted to, because in the book Shin talked a lot about how North Korea, how much harder it was to live in there because he didn't have any food. He went dumpster diving and stuff, and then when he got to South Korea, he had so much more access to different things. So I wanted to see how true it was, so I looked it up.
Okay. So is life in North Korea comparable to life in South Korea at all?
Oh, no.
I don't know.
Basically night and day almost.
Okay.
Because I think of it as South Korea, it's more like how we live, and then North Korea, I can't even imagine
So I did the changes from how he went from being in camp to being out of camp. And I just think it's crazy how you can go from being born into the camp and not knowing anything but that camp life. And then when he escapes, he gets out there and he has no idea what he's doing. And even when because he's used to having at least some people around that he does have some knowing of. But when he gets out there, he has nobody that he knows. And he's really just by himself, even more than he was in that camp. And he goes around and tries to get somewhere, food or places to live, and everyone just keeps pushing him off. And he's just really not used to this life of not having set rules, set things that he always has to do. He's basically free and he doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah, your group spent a long time in your presentation focusing on life in the camp, which I think is valid. But you had a large portion of your text focused on life outside of camp and the challenges he faced there. Could you guys touch on those things a little bit?
Well, once he escapes from the camp, Shin's basically just confused and stumbling around, pretty much blindly, like, okay, which way is north, how do I get out of here? Because so, like, you mean, the guards are eventually going to try and hunt him down, or even then North Korea's own residents, once they find out that, you know, Shin's an escaped convict, basically, they'll likely want to bring him back, and, well, he'll probably be executed. So from there, from the time he escapes the camp, it's basically him trying to get across North Korea's border, then into China, and then basically through China into South Korea, because China has their own policy of hunting down North Korean refugees.
Okay.
And then from South Korea, he went to the United States, but then he didn't like it as much there, so he eventually went back to South Korea. But a lot of, like, throughout the book, besides the last couple chapters, it really just, like, brought him, like, just telling his story, basically, through the reporter that, yeah.
I just think it'd be really hard to go from having this life in camp to putting yourself outside camp. Like, what do you even do with yourself, you know? I don't know how he went through that.
Another big thing was like the guards on the borders were so much more lenient than the guards in camp.
Mm-hmm.
The guards in camp would beat anyone any chance they could get, but the ones on the border, they're like, we're not getting paid enough to actually care about this job, so you can give us cigarettes or
Yeah,
whatever else for backup. Like,
that's how
more paydays.
Shin got through. He bribed a guard with a pack of cigarettes to get across.
Mhm.
So I did North Korea and the similarities to a Nazi concentration camp. So the Korean camps and Nazi camps are very similar to each other because Nazi camps and Korean camps, they all have these people just concentrated into one camp, hence concentration camps. Some of the difference in the North Korean camps, you actually got food. You
Only got food in both.
it depends, and you got to learn, and you got to, well, in Nazi concentration camps, sometimes you were sent to camps just to go straight into the gas chambers, or you were forced to do labor. Kind of like in North Korea, you were forced to do labor from the moment you could do stuff. But when you were a child, you had to go to school, you had to learn, you had like a really long time in school, and then during the summer, when kids would go out, they would have to go work in the field with their parents. And in Nazi concentration camps, they were forced out of their homes and were forced to work until they basically died of exhaustion sometimes. And they were gassed, they were killed, they were murdered. And when you were in concentration camps, you got no food, like I said, because the Nazis didn't really care about any of the Jews, because they thought that they were the reason for losing World War I. And many times prisoners were just killed for the enjoyment of the guards and stuff. And in North Korea, I wouldn't say you had a good life, but it was a lot better than being in a concentration camp, I would say.
Why?
Because in North Korea, you weren't just killed for the enjoyment of someone, and you actually got food, you actually got to do these things. And in concentration camps, you were just put in these really long, like trailer-like things, and you were just piled in, like cattle, basically.
Okay, Sarah. I will concede that there are some similarities, but I will also point out that there are some flaws in your logic. Okay? Group, do you want to clarify anything there?
Death camp, concentration camp. Technically
there's
different.
two.
Okay. So what is the purpose of North Korea's Camp 14? Because that's the one you read about.
to basically lock up political prisoners, and those, the state deems, are basically a danger to itself, where its own public can't see them.
Okay, so primary difference between these two camps, because you're right, they're incredibly similar, is in North Korea, those prisoners are given a little speck of hope that someday they might get out. Is that hope reality?
No.
No. In a labor camp, in a death camp, in a concentration camp in World War II, was there ever that promise that you might someday get out?
No.
There was early on though. Because
Yeah,
concentration
there
camps
was.
early on weren't designed to be.
Because they went from ghettos just to concentration camps. So there was
There's a difference between a ghetto
I
and
know,
being
I'm
sent
saying
to
they
a
went
camp.
from 1 to 1. I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
There's a difference
Yeah, they still
between the
had hope in
ghetto
the beginning.
process and the camp process. And there's a difference in who was in charge of that camp and what the purpose was and who was there. Because if you were sent there as a Jewish person or a gypsy person versus someone who was sent there as a political prisoner or as a homosexual or as a religious something else, it was very, very different. And sometimes we only see it from that Jewish perspective. So recognize there are some differences there. And that camps in Asia, you had POW camps in Japan and China. We have a camp situation going on in other countries in this moment in time, are run a little bit differently. You had a big camp issue going on with the French and Indochina and Indonesia and those areas too. So your purpose is slightly different and the treatment slightly different. But you're right, there is if we want to understand it according to what we already know, that's where you would make your connections, and you know more about that history than you do about the Eastern history. Good, keep going.
I also found it interesting about the camps, how like in North Korea, camps have been going on a lot longer than, like they've been going on for way longer than the Nazi camps.
Or gulag.
Yeah.
Good, Russian gulags, good connection.
So I ended up getting the snitching part of main ideas, and if you snitch to the wrong person, so like Shin, he snitched to a night guard instead of his teacher. When he returned to classes, his teacher got mad at him and had his entire class beat on him and then steal his food too, until he was almost dead. And
Okay.
then
Clarify what you mean by snitching.
Shin told the night guard about his mother's and his brother's plan to escape instead of his teachers, and the night guard got the advantages that the teacher didn't because he snitched to the night guard. And then because the teacher found out about that, the teacher allowed his class to beat on him and allow all that, and then you were pretty much relied upon to snitch more often and more if you knew anything about it, and to or about people who were even suspected of conspiring to escape or plan something else that they didn't want.
Yeah, and what was the benefit from that?
He got better treatment, he got more food, and then it was pretty much better for him overall.
Okay.
Basically, snitching was good, like, because if you snitched, you got treated better, mostly. Okay. And these are our critical responses.
For positive ones, from Maslin Janet on The Casual Horrors of Life in a North Korean Hell, from the New York Times on April 12, 2012, accessed May 10th, 2018. Readers may well be won over by the sharp, declarative, young adult style of Mr. Hardin's adventure writing. They will respond to urgent concerns about conditions of North Korean prison camps, which are now visible via satellite photographs.
So basically, it's just saying how, like interesting it was to read about this, because most people don't think this, like, actually happens, but reading it from a person that actually escaped from there and gives us details about it, it shows, like, how interesting his life story is.
Did you guys agree with that? Did you
Yeah.
find it
Yeah,
interesting?
we found it pretty
Just
interesting.
going through reading it it's kind of hard to think, oh, this was real, this actually happened and is going on right now.
So like it just really gives like an insight of what he really went through.
Yep.
As for negative ones, one thing about the book is that it has been revealed on a couple of years. I've seen a couple of accounts that Shin had basically admitted some problems with the story after other defectors have began questioning his own version, as it's revealed that he basically might have, and even the own author admits at one point that getting Shin to tell the full story was quite difficult for him, since Shin is basically, it's believed that Shin's basically gone through so much trauma that he often gets he often intentionally or maybe unintentionally gets events basically blurred in his head or even out loud. So.
But your author is transparent about that,
Mhm.
that he's not even sure he can believe certain things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he states that in the book.
Like-
He says that there are parts in the book that are off on the timeline because of how Shin told it to him.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that he originally conveyed Shin's story through a series of newspaper articles, and then the true story came out when he interviewed him for the book,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So he's pointing out that there's differences, and that's what a reporter's job is,
Mhm.
to tell the story as accurately as he can and to point out the flaws within the story. So knowing that and admitting that that's a problematic thing, how do you think the author dealt with it?
I think he tried to give it like the most honest approach he possibly could, like basically take all the pieces he gotten from Shin and other sources and basically combine them into basically a chain that makes the most sense, like both logically and narratively as well, you know, as, like for example, Shin basically has admitted that little things such as when events took place or like how severe or lesser they may have occurred, so he basically probably would just balance them out to the best of his abilities is what I imagine.
So if you were to recommend this book to someone, who would you recommend it to and why?
I definitely recommend it to people who like history and
Mhm.
who like even economics now, like government-based kind of like,
History, geopolitics, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Even maybe an older age, just because of some of the things that are described in there.
Yeah,
Definitely not a book
there's
for children.
definitely rape that happens
Yeah.
within the book, and the beatings are very descriptive, and
Same with some of the
so an
torture.
older group of kids.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, I really liked it for, like, I'm not really a history person, but I thought it was interesting, like learning
Yeah,
all
it was
the
a good book.